Hi everyone, so I want to give an update on the new Natalya rework that we have seen in the final patch notes that we just got last night. I already made a video discussing it briefly and all the other changes that you can see in those patch notes. If you haven't seen them yet, go check it out. I have the link in the description, including the defeat planner for the setup I'm about to show you. So this is some footage here from the PTR. This is not actually the live server because the patch is not out yet. We have to wait until Tuesday evening for that. But we can already discuss and theory craft, and I have done so last night on stream, and I want to show you what we've got so far so that you can be ready to try it out, or just in case you're curious and want to prepare for the season. We'll have the full guide for this build once we have actually done a bit of testing with it on the live server, but that will be in a few days. So on the PTR here, I actually did try to kind of like fake a scenario that is pretty close to what we actually got in the patch notes. So you see here, I have counters on the bar, I'm doing no strafe, I'm doing this multi-shot trigger combo. So very much like the final setup is going to look like, I imagine. But it was really scuffed here. I didn't have the damage, I didn't have the cooldown and the resources sometimes to actually use my traps. And it has a super long cooldown here that you can see. I have to wait like 8 seconds or so to put a single one, while in the next patch you will be able to spam them everywhere. I also don't have this pulling effect that we got. So you can kind of see a little bit what's going on, I guess, but it's hard to imagine like the full setup working. So I have those setups here, and we have a bunch of push, 4-man, solo, speeds, and T16 variations that I'm going to go into. And I think the setup is going to be extremely strong. So I think this might even be somewhere around the level of like Nova for 4-man. We'll see, but at least the numbers look pretty promising. So while we did lose the automatic spike traps, we did get a lot of extra damage for each of those spike traps in the patch notes. So you can see this here right now. First of all, they added double damage to enemies affected by caltrops. And then you also have to slot in the caltrops. It gives you like another small buff with baited trap, for example, for 10% extra crit. But let's just say it's double damage. And they also increased this consecutive explosion chain damage from 10% to 25% more damage than the previous blast. So what happened during the PTR is that people played with the lightning rune, and lightning just seemed to have the most DPS because of some mechanics that make it better than others. So this is the way to go. And lightning also has 3 zaps. So instead of 1 explosion, it actually hits 3 times. And each of those actually counts as a consecutive explosion. So when you have 10 traps and they all hit 3 times, you get up to 29 zaps and up to 29 times this 25% extra damage bonus. And not only that, but on the PTR, when people were playing this with the strafe version that was automatically spawning traps, you barely got this stacking chain reaction damage bonus at all, because you're constantly overriding the previous traps. So you did get like 10, 20, 30% more damage or so, maybe up to 40. But after that, the chain reaction was interrupted and you were already spawning new traps. So now that you have to do a manual playstyle, you'll be able to reliably get the entire 29 chain reaction consecutive blasts, so to say, and get this maximum bonus that is actually like a 700 something % damage buff for the last trap at least. And this raises the average damage per trap significantly. And here's some footage from the PTR where I was strafing around, and you can see here this trap counter. It's usually at 10, and this means I usually override my other traps and I don't get these consecutive blasts. But instead, they just like spray everywhere and there's lightning everywhere, which, to be fair, was a pretty smooth build. But I think that the new build is way more powerful than this because of those consecutive blasts, because you have control over where the traps are, because right now you see here they're like all over the place, especially when there's enemies spread out a bit. And they don't actually like deal damage to exactly what you want to deal damage to. And this is not all, because now you can also pull enemies. So this is part of the set rework. In the 4-piece bonus, it blasts affected enemies towards the nearest caltrops. So whatever that means, I imagine is going to be quite helpful, at least in the push scenario, where you can like put a caltrop in the middle somewhere, and then you start spraying those spike traps everywhere, and you just like pull enemies closer and closer, and then they're like really tightly stacked, and you get lots of area damage, which, by the way, in the strafe version here did not work at all. So another reason why this is most likely going to end up really powerful. Area damage, depending on the pole size, can significantly multiply your overall DPS. And we're talking about something like ×5 up to ×10 your DPS just from area damage when you have enough targets. So obviously in the push scenario, sometimes you have bigger pulls, sometimes you have smaller pulls. You fight the boss at some point where you don't get any area damage. But in general, I think that just having area damage versus not having area damage is at least something like a 5 tier buff or more. Especially if you combine it with this pulling effect, where it can get more value from your area damage. And you see here, I'm doing this 130, like no problem whatsoever, not even using my potion at all. So this is a completed no potion run. And this was a cakewalk. So at this point, with like 2k paragons or so on the PTR, I could have probably pushed something like 140 quite comfortably. Obviously, this can be improved with more fishing. This can be improved with the potions, which on their own probably give this build something like a 5 tier buff or more even. And then there's also the 2 tiers buff that we get from the season theme again, from the latest updates where they changed some of the numbers on the damage buffs. So overall, this setup would already look like a comfortable 145 plus at least, pretty close to 150. And now with this new version, yeah, it's going to be pretty ridiculous, I believe. So we have lots of that damage, and I think that the overall buff to Natalya compared to PTR is something like at least 10 tiers. So this is going to be a pretty comfortable S tier pushing build in my opinion, and it definitely has some potential for a 4-man trash killer variant, even competing with Nova or Meteor, and potentially even some like high tier speed runs that yeah, you can include some speed here as well. So you get a lot of discipline from the 2-piece bonus. So that's part of the patch notes. It gives you 2 discipline per exploded trap. And usually you explode like 5 traps in maybe 2-3 seconds or so. And those are doubled, and then you get 2 discipline per trap. So every 5 seconds or so, or maybe faster, you get 20 discipline. So you can really spam your smoke screen, you can run through the rift. It should be pretty smooth and fast actually. And then obviously there are some different variations here. So I made a All-Girls Crimson variant here. I made an All-Girls Guardian variant for low Paragon. And there's also one that also includes a convention of elements. So this might be something for like the more hardcore players and a bit trickier to play, because now you have to time this with COE, which previously was not included here. You just have to have the Endless Walk. But the build is not like the super tankiest, I imagine, with the setup. So actually using Endless Walk will be a bit tough, but it might end up just fine with the extra toughness buff they threw in there in the patch. And for example, this very high smoke screen uptime, and the fact that you pull enemies around so they don't actually attack you and these kind of things. So we'll have to see how this works out in practice, but I think you can definitely take some rather greedy choices here. And the 4-man variants are also very similar. You mostly have to drop the Stricken. So here we have Molten Wildebeest, for example, to protect the Squirt's Necklace. And you can maybe key that up a little bit with the party buffs. You have like a few building toughness, and if the runs are not very slow, this should definitely work out well. Same here in like speed variants. I also put in the COE Squirts combo again instead of Endless Walk. That just doesn't really work there. And we have like the All-Girls Guardian, yeah, like really high damage. And I am slightly concerned about the boss damage on this build. So this is also why the COE plus Squirts combo is really helpful, even in speedruns. So if the boss damage might be too low, then you can just blow them up on a lightning cycle, and that's basically it. What you need to know about spike traps in general is that they don't explode on their own anymore. So this was how it worked in vanilla D3 like 10 years ago. And then at some point, some years ago, they changed them to what they are now. And they have to be manually triggered. So you put them on the ground and they lay there until you do something, which is going to be usually the multi-shot. So there's like the only spender that triggers the spike traps that actually does something. There's a buff. So you get 8% crit chance, you get the chill effect, which is actually quite nice. You can get proc Bane of the Trapped and Call the Weak very easily with just one multi-shot. So this is like your trigger that you use to activate them. And in some of the 4-man variants, you will have the multi-shot already from the support Demon Hunter, so you don't need to do that. And instead you can just use a strafe and just like tap it. And this also allows you, for example, to very comfortably move around. So this is what we know so far about this entire build and how I expect it to go. Obviously, there will be some tweaks to those builds, depending on how realistic some of these choices are. But overall, this is roughly how I think this will go. Obviously, I'm going to keep you guys updated. I'm going to have a full guide for you next week, maybe on Wednesday, I guess, after I've tried it out on the live server. You have to wait until Tuesday until the patch comes. Let me know what your feelings are about this whole Natalya rework. Are you excited, or are you just going to blast with God Demon Hunter and forget about this? And that also concludes this video here for now. So, hope you liked this, and see you guys next time.